system.
Yes.
And then, I mean, I think what we're talking about is, and we'd really like to compare it to your systems in your respective countries, a broad line comparison. I mean, here we have about 2/3 in the public sector, 1/3 of the schools in the private sector. Interestingly enough, 97% of the madrasas are in the private sector. Compare that.
Yes.
Look at that diversion.
Yes.
And the state of the public sector schools is that about 50% of them are not in a condition which is even barely acceptable. Come to the private sector. Now that is fairly tiered here in Pakistan, and I'm just going over this sort of information so we can compare it to your countries. In the private sector, you have you can start from the top, the elite schools, a very small number of schools in the country where all the mediums of instruction is in English, like the other tiers as well, like the mid-level and the lower mid-level. However, they're providing excellent education. They cost upwards of about 10 to 15,000 rupees a month for each child to attend. Then we have the middle tier where education is fairly decent and the school fees would be a little bit less. And then there is the really low level where, you know, a child will pay for 300 to 400 rupees. And there's this tiered system which is producing different classes of children in the country. If I could, you know, ask you, how would you compare it to the systems in your country? How many do you have?
In the United States, we don't have uniform education. We do have mandatory education, that everyone must be provided with the opportunity to go to school, but that doesn't mean it has to be equal access. The state that I'm from is unconstitutional in the fact that even among the public sector, some students have lots of access to very high quality education, and some have access to very poor quality education. And you could even look at the public sector and say there are some schools that are what you're terming elitist, just means that they're doing a better job of preparing the students according to what we know about learning, compared to those at the bottom who are just back in the 19th century with classrooms and teaching that look exactly as they did when our country was founded. That's not going to help anyone, whether you're from a very expensive school or a very poor school. What will make a difference is if we focus our attention on learning and make equal access for all students. That's the issue in the United States. In my own state, 1/3 of all the universities are private, but 1/3 of all the universities are in fact providing spaces that could not be provided if it were left to the public sector. We don't have the taxes to support that.
And if we compare that with the UK, Andy?
Well, if I may say, first of all, remind people the UK is made up of 4 quite distinct countries and their systems are rather different. England is the largest, which I know well. May I speak about that specifically? Historically, England has had about 5 to 7% over time of private schools. So over 90% of children go to state schools, government schools, starting at the age of about 4, and now actually it's mandatory to stay till they are 17, and that will soon be 18. It's possible to have a little bit of a variety there. There is some homeschooling, but I would argue that about 95% of children go straight through state schools.
And in Britain, has policy for, say, the last few decades been fairly consistent in terms of education, in terms of access to children, access to education for children?
Well, I'd have to say I don't think I know any country where policy has been consistent in education. It's been always changing. Put crudely, we have, you know, in England, the government is either of the right or of the left. The right strongly favours a very diverse system, and the left more of a common state system. I would say by and large the consensus is that most children should have access to, as Dennis says, high quality learning in their neighbourhood. Okay? So in other words, they don't have to go away to school. So the majority model in England is the school, your primary school, your secondary school will be within a mile of your home, and you'll be able to walk there, go there.
Absolutely.
However, as Dennis says, actually, particularly in urban centres, schools will vary hugely in the quality of education provided. The model of private schooling in England is principally a residential model. So you can go away quite a long way away for your schooling. It is a tiered system.
The net result, yes, it's a tiered system. You have the government schools, and then you have, and within the government as well, you have the comprehensives and the grammars, and then you have the private and the public schools.
A minority of grammar schools.
A minority.
Yes.
So there's access to all at least, and I would be able to say the same for the US, wouldn't I? That
Most
there is-
likely.
yeah, access to all, basically, to education up till the age of 16 or 17 or 18.
It seems that way, but if you're really poor and you're from the urban centers, you really don't have access to quality education in most cities.
So when comparing that with Pakistan, I mean, a large number, as Dr. Iqbal was saying, do not even have access to any education at all, however minimal that might be.
Yes.
Other than that, we want to ask you also about another angle to all of this. There's a language factor here in Pakistan, which is, apart from all the problems we already discussed, which create tiers and which create sections of society who will be limited to a certain a number of opportunities. It's the language factor as well. Pakistan has not been able to decide on the language of teaching as well.
Yes, before taking the language issue, I would like to add that, as both my colleagues said, that education in UK and USA both, it is compulsory. I may agree with my friend from the USA that all of them may not have an access to equal quality school, but they have access to good school and compulsory in the public system. But in Pakistan, we are the only country in, we are the few countries in the world where we have a larger share of private system. For example, in India, only 15% total enrollment is in private sector, only 15%. And we have about 1/3, 33%. We have a larger proportion of enrollment in private system. This is because the government is not coming with a heavy agenda of providing access to schooling. We're not talking about quality, we're talking about even access.
I think we're talking about very low allocation of resources. Very low allocation of resources, and that's just allocation.
Yes.
It's normally been between 1.5% to 2% of the GDP which has been allocated to education. Yeah. And then the actual usage is even lower than that. And when it's used, how it's used and how it's wasted, etc., is another issue.
Is another issue, yes. And coming to the language issue, yes, I agree with you that basically the private schools, which if we may call them elite school, and these elite school, they are all the school with 33% of the school, they are not elite school, as you said. They have different tiers in them. The elite school may be about 1,000 or 2,000 elite school, right, which are basically English medium schools. Basically their elitist element is because of their medium of instruction, because they have adopted English as a medium of instruction. This is basically a huge problem and huge issue within Pakistan, because English by all means is a foreign language, and the rules which govern the acquisition of language are different for the foreign language compared to the acquisition of language as a native language. You can acquire your native language in your native environment through natural way, but you have to put a lot of effort to learn a foreign language like English. And then we come to an issue of English using as a medium of instruction.
That's right. Dr. Iqbal, if I can just interrupt you here, because we're going to go on a break and then come back with some solutions. What we've discussed so far is a quick comparison of the state of education in developed countries like the UK and the US, and in Pakistan. As we were talking, there are a number of differences. Of course, there is the first big difference is the resource allocation. The second difference is, yes, there is some level of tiering in education in your countries as well, but in ours, in Pakistan, we find that the difference is very, very large, with a huge percentage of the population not even being able to access education at all. And our system specifically, as Dr. Iqbal was saying, is producing very different classes of people, starkly with different kinds of opportunities available to them. But here we're going to take a short break and come back and perhaps try and look at some solutions.